away. And I need to see the key, Werner, so I can remember what all the other ones were. I think it's lower left. So, and this one is locates the fire station. That's where the police station is in relationship to what's.
That's the
That's
other
not
fire
right.
station.
That's the other fire station. There's the police station. The purple with the hatch through it, those locations are town-owned parcels. What's in blue, which I'm not seeing on here, must be further out, are state-owned lands. And then the lighter green areas are other open spaces or land trust. This is the land conservation trust parcels that are in yellow. There's a lot of information, so it's kind of difficult to really show it on this screen. It would have been better on that. But so this is kind of an overview that we said we put together in terms of identifying what that connectivity is between existing open spaces, the open space on this site, and the connectivity as far as bikes and sidewalks.
Bob, is there any, on the Conservation Trust side, is there any already paths from the village parcel to the Conservation Trust? Not yet?
Not yet. I actually talked to Tom Bradbury a little bit about this. There is a parcel, two parcels that have recently obtained that may have potential for connectivity here. This is where their trails are, but they've acquired a couple of, I can't tell on this, I think they're roughly in this area where they might be able to tie into the village parcel. But those will be out of ways. I think they just acquired the land probably within the last couple of months.
Oh.
Okay. Any other questions, Jamie?
Bob, can you explain the two big red arrows again, please?
The arrow?
Yeah.
Okay, this basically is a riparian wildlife corridor running through the parcel, going off in these two directions. This is based on some of the information that Chris had pulled together on this plan. Anything else I can add to that?
No, I mean, essentially, I guess it doesn't seem like you can't see some riparian, there's a lot of wetlands. And so that's one arrow showing a major corridor, riparian corridor that kind of heads up north and then goes through the site. In other areas, there are similar wetland and complexes. So it just shows the context of the property, also the size of the property in relation to some of the larger conservation areas you have north and to the east.
Okay. All right. Next slide, Werner, please. Oop. Let me shrink this one down. So basically what we did, based on the input we've had from the various stakeholder meetings, the visioning session, and the other steering committee meeting and input that was has been put in, as far as mixed residential, looking at year-round residents, either single-family, multifamily in the sense of like a duplex, multiplex buildings that it can include apartments or condominiums, and then cottage-style small-type units. As far as municipal uses, potential new town hall, a new location for emergency service, fire and rescue, or others that may be identified in as future needs. And that's part of this whole planning, is for the town not knowing what may be needed as we go down line, that some of the land be retained to be able to accommodate whatever future need comes about. Small neighborhood service type uses, office or shared office space, coffee shop, daycare, or others that may be identified as it moves through the process. And that would be limited in scale, something small that just really services the neighborhood, not creating a location that it'd be a point for tourism to come. It's more or less intended to serve that immediate neighborhood area. And that's the type of stuff that was looked at. Open space uses, preserve the environmental sensitive areas, the wetlands, the stream corridor, significant vernal pools, and then look at how pedestrian bicycle trails can be integrated either into the open space itself or as well on sidewalks in whatever the development occurs. Identify areas for passive recreation type uses, community gardens, and public gathering areas. Then connectivity, again, it's sidewalks and bike lanes. Emergency services, accessibility between North Street to School Street and Cape Porpoise. That was a point raised in terms of especially during the summer months or the elongated tourist period of time, trying to get through in the Dock Square areas, the fire department's got to come around. It's a long way to travel. Same thing with the police department. This provides a potential connectivity. And then future land use needs. And again, there are items that are not identified now that would require looking at holding particular parcels for future type development. If you can go to the next one. So one of the things we looked at, and I should have addressed in the first one, in terms of potential municipal for either a town hall or, fire rescue location, Laurie and the staff have gone through and having someone look at what the needs are for a new potential town hall as well as for a fire barn, based on the square footage that she gave to us, and then looking at what potential parking requirements would be needed to serve both of those type entities. We're looking at about 2.5 acre as far as the land area to be able to accommodate those. And that's plus or minus without actually doing a full design. And one of those pockets is this location right in here, and the other pocket is here, which is just on the other side of the CMP easement. So. Potential cost estimate. Primarily what we looked at is only for the road in the public infrastructure is a cost at this point for development, since that would be the connective tissue and how future development can actually occur. You really need the access ways coming in and the utilities. So we took a look at in terms of what that potential cost would be. And to construct the road, as a completed road, which would mean all the way final pavement, all the utilities in, from North Street to School Street, you're looking at about $5.4 million. That's based on, and that was pretty close to what some of the other improvements were on the prior development, the site. With that,
And Bob, can you
Yeah.
just confirm what utilities are included in that amount?
that would be the extension of sewer, water. It would be bringing power underground and other communication services, because those are about
As
the only
well
ones
as
you
the
have.
road.
As well as the road, which would mean final pavement. It would be curbed. It would include the stormwater infrastructure that would have to go in to address the stormwater management requirements. It does not include anything. It includes loam and seed to stabilize along either side. We did not put landscaping in the budget, but in a rough number to just do street trees and buffering, we're looking between 200 to 250,000. Just on a general number, just taking the overall length and estimating spacing between trees and that sort of thing, and certain buffer areas. So, but that would be the budget number on that. Again, development of this not happening all at one time, looking at it as a phase type development. The other thing is with the road itself. Short of putting the utilities in, you wouldn't necessarily want to complete the road in full pavement, because as you start doing development, you start bringing equipment in to do development, you're going to damage the road. So you'd be looking at doing it in a phase type situation. So that can control the cost. I mean, as an example, if this was defined as phase 1 in terms of any potential development, you'd just extend the road up to this location and utilities up to serve those particular uses. So it wouldn't be a case you'd do the entire section of roadway. Because the other part of this is still unknown as to what that final design would be. Again, these are bubbles showing where development could occur. We had shown conceptual plans before how you could develop it and create that neighborhood fabric. But again, that was conceptual. It's not a final design. This whole plan is really to give some guidance to the town as to how this land can be utilized. The residential component, I know everybody was afraid of that the last time they saw it. We needed to do something to be able to identify what the cost parameters were and whether or not that type of development would even be financially feasible to achieve what the town's goals were. So that's why we had gone to that level of detail and now working our way back through it. And Tom Dworsky will be talking about some of the marketing study that he's done based on what we were looking at, so we can be able to discuss that in a little more detail. So this is a long-term process till we get to the final endpoint. So this is close to what we're identifying towards the end of the master plan in terms of what is developable area and what is open space type areas.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
say phase 1,
Mhm.
beginning, which would probably start on the North Street side. taking in, what do you think the utility and the road cost would be to take it to the first level, roughly?
Well, that's 1,300 feet into where the CMP easement is, so about a sixth of the cost. However, I'd have to put a caveat on that. The pump station would have to go in, and the pump station would be a little bit a higher number out of that, so it might be a little bit more than a sixth of the cost, because that pump station would serve pretty much the entire development. And based on the concepts we were looking at, future, there may even have to be a second pump station depending on what your density in certain areas would be. But you would need at least the one pump station, because right now, in order to get to where the manhole is to tie in for gravity, there were too many pipes coming across the way, so it had to go under, which meant we couldn't get the gravity feed. So that's why the pump station is in there. Everything else is pretty much gravity along the main road down, and then there were some areas with the grade change that might be some smaller pump station
You
requirements.
could basically use $1,000 as a linear foot, right?
Pretty close, yeah.
So, any estimate, plus or minus.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob, that, if I'm not mistaken, there's about 52 acres of buildable on the total.
I'll get to that in the next slide. I'll start talking about what's there.
Thank you.
Okay? Any other questions on this? Okay. Ready? So these are the density facts. Currently, the property is village residential from the power line to North Street. From the power line to School Street is free enterprise. So what I did here is looking at this from the standpoint of being multi-family type units. What I did is I broke this thing down. Your single-family lot requirements in the village is a minimum 40,000 square feet. For a dwelling or a single-family unit, it's 40,000 square feet. If you do a multifamily, which is a duplex unit, 40,000 square foot minimum lot size, but 20,000 square feet per dwelling unit. If you go with a multiplex, which is 3 or more units within a building, you need a minimum of a 60,000 square foot parcel and 20,000 square feet per dwelling unit. That's under the current zoning for village residential. In the free enterprise, a single family is still 40,000 and a 40,000 net residential area. And for multifamily or the duplex, it's 40,000 and 20,000. The multiplex units are not allowed within that free enterprise zone at this point. So with a conceptual master plan based on the way we had run through this, we had done some modifications from that first visioning session one, because we identified some areas that had been shown for potential development that really, development didn't make sense, so we kind of modified that. So based on a concept master plan, looking at a variation of lot sizes, the potential within those defined areas on the School Street side of the CMP power easement, you could potentially have 134 to 180 dwelling units. And that would be talking about the village of a mixed type of uses from single family to duplex to multiplex type housing. We have the municipal parcels identified as 5 plus or minus acres. The mixed use parcels is about 3 acres. And then the open space, including the CMP easement, is 37 plus or minus acres. As a comparison, the Old Port Village project that was approved on that site, the net developable area out of the 86.97 acres was 53.9 acres net. Based on the zoning, the village residential, and the free enterprise, 115 mixed multifamily and multiplex dwelling units could have been developed. What was proposed on that site was a total of 80 dwelling units, 34 multifamily or duplex, and 12 multiplex units contained in 3 buildings. So that's kind of give you a comparison of what we're looking at as far as potential density based on current zoning, and then looking at what feasibility there is to be able to accommodate for some additional housing needs in a mixed range of housing cost. This obviously for Old Port Village was on a much higher end than what we're asked to look at in terms of finding ways of making property affordable for young families to come in, and also for our aging in place population that wants to downsize from their larger homes but wants something smaller, but there really isn't anything really available. So that's how some of these numbers are starting to break out. So
Bob, was that also including high income, high price housing somewhere along in there? Was that figured into?
it was not looked at in terms of the type scale of pricing that would have been the Old Port Village or Wallace Woods as an example. Tom, do you remember what the high end we were talking about for a lot, for the upper end for a house?
The house, Wallace Woods is around $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of what we were looking at in terms of scale, we were down in the 500, that was it 300 to 500 for the upper end size?
Yes.
But those are really limited in terms of number of lots we were looking at when we started breaking numbers down to be able to do an assessment on. Okay. Anything else? I think the next slide and maybe Tom's PowerPoint. Right. So I'll need the PowerPoint. Well, we're just getting that up and running for Tom. Anybody have any questions on what I've presented to this point? And that'll give Tom a chance to get set up. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to describe as best I can what's on the slides here for those that can't see so well. So what I'll be talking about is the market analysis component of this. This is kind of what could be supported on the village parcel in the market. It's not a recommendation of what you should do, it's just what can be supported.
And Tom, can you just talk a little bit about what your company does so people,
Sure.
you're not with Bob?
Yep. Sorry, let me back up. My name is Tom Duretsky. I'm with Camoin 310. We're an economic development firm. We've been partnering with Mitchell and Associates to work on the market side to make sure the plan works with the market and is financially feasible. So what I'll be talking about, first I'll just quickly describe, Werner, you can go to the next slide, the purpose of a market analysis, go through some economic and demographic trends, and how that relates into the housing market trends here in the region and in Kennebunkport. I'll talk about what the potential is for residential development from a market perspective, and then briefly touch on retail potential as well, and then open up for questions. Next slide. So the purpose of a market analysis, it's to inform the community about the type and amount of development that can be supported in the market. It ensures that the master plan is in line with what is financially feasible. It does not recommend what should be done, only what can be done. It also does not consider current zoning or any other development restrictions. It's just completely based on market demand. Next slide. So to start with some economic context, the southern Maine regional economy, and southern Maine here is defined as York and Cumberland counties. The region's seen a decade of strong job growth. This bar over here is southern Maine compared to Maine and the U.S. So over the past 10 years, southern Maine's seen about 7.5% employment growth, just a little shy of what the U.S. saw, and significantly above Maine for the whole. The housing market here has been strong. The economy really nationally is projected to slow. You know, there have been talks of a recession looming and those sorts of things. And that, you know, that could certainly be felt here as well. But in terms of kind of projecting how the economy is doing forward, the economy is still projected to grow, although at a slower rate. Most sectors will continue to grow. So this means steady demand for housing at the right price points. Next slide. So just some context now. I'll be referring throughout this presentation to the housing market area. This is the area where new residents to Kennebunkport are likely to move from. Of course, you have people moving here from all over the country, really. But when we're defining a market area, we're looking at where are the majority of people coming from. And this is really focused on year-round residents and not seasonal residents. So the market area contains contains about 11 towns and cities in the immediate Kennebunkport area. So from the coast, Old Orchard Beach down to Wells, and then inland to Sanford, Alfred, Lyme, and Dayton. Just some background, where have new Kennebunkport residents moved from? This is based on census data, so it kind of asks, in the last year, how many people have moved and where they moved from. About half of folks that have moved to Kennebunkport in the last year have come from within York County. Another 12% have come from elsewhere in Maine, and about 40% have come from another state. Next slide. Population growth. So when you see HMA, that's the housing market area. That's an 11-town region. The housing market area has added about 13,000 residents since 2010. Wells, Saco, and Kennebunk have contributed the most of those residents. Those are the top three on the graph over here. Kennebunkport added about 250. That's here in orange. And Kennebunkport's obviously small, so it's not going to add as much, but when you look at it proportionally, it's grown slightly faster than the housing market area and much faster than Maine as a whole. Next slide. So now we'll look a bit at demographics. So we'll start with age. Kennebunkport has the highest median age in the housing market area of any of those 11 towns at 55 years old. Here's Kennebunkport, Wells, Kennebunk, Old Orchard. The York County average is about 45, Maine's about 45. The US is 38. So Kennebunkport's about 17 years older than the US on average. 42% of households are senior households, 65 years and up. That compares to about 32% of US households. You have only about 14% of households that are what we call family age. The age where people start families, so the 25 to 44. So 14% in Kennebunkport, 27% in the US. This graph kind of shows it visually. So the green bars are the share of Kennebunkport's population from 0 to 4, all the way down here, all the way up to 85 plus. The dots here are kind of benchmarks from comparison regions. So the blue is the housing market area, yellow is York County, and the dark blue is the US. So you can kind of see there's a gap in this section, the kind of family starting age section. And then when you get into the senior age cohorts, Kennebunkport has a much higher representation. Next slide. Now we'll talk a little bit about income. Kennebunkport also has the highest median income in the housing market area at about $92,000 a year. That compares to about $61,000 in the housing market area. This graph kind of shows the distribution of income, so less than $25,000 up to $200,000 or greater. The orange bar is the average share of Kennebunkport households. So Kennebunkport has about 3.5% of all households in the HMA. It has almost 12% of the households over $200,000 a year, and about 1.5% of those less than 25%, and then it kind of goes incrementally from there. Next slide. Moving on to the housing stock itself. So here we're looking on the left at year-round housing stock, owner versus renter units. About 83% of Kennebunkport year-round units are owner, 17% are renter occupied. That compares to about 68%, 32% in the housing market area. So Kennebunkport has less renter housing than the region. We know it has a fairly limited year-round rental housing stock for folks that need to find housing year-round and not seasonally. And then here on the right, this shows the percent of housing stock that is seasonal. So Kennebunkport has a very high share of seasonal housing. 40% of all homes are seasonally occupied, compared to 17% in the housing market area. Next slide. New residential construction. So this is based on building permit data from the census. Kennebunkport added about 120 housing units between 2014 and 2018, about 5% of all units that were added in the housing market area. Most development activity occurred in Wells and Saco. 83% of new units in the region were single family, 17% were multifamily. So again, recall that Kennebunkport overall has about 3.5% of all households in the region. They added about 5% of housing. So you're adding slightly more housing than your share, so to speak. Next. Home sales trends. So the housing market has been doing quite well in southern Maine. The inventory of homes in York County has fallen over the last several years, meaning that the number of homes on the market is down. That's tightening supply amid growing demand, so that usually has an upward pressure on prices. The median days on the market has fallen, meaning that houses go quickly once they are listed for sale. So all indications show that the housing market will continue to be strong, but begin to level off just a little bit. You have very high prices in Kennebunkport, so that points to very strong demand locally, and you have extremely low availability of homes at modest price points. Next. So digging a little bit into the numbers on home prices, Kennebunkport has the highest median home sale price in the region, so this is showing the median price that homes actually sold for in 2018. So of all homes sold in 2018, this was the median price. $675,000 was the median price in Kennebunkport compared to $275,000 in York County, so a full $400,000 higher in the town. Nearly half of Kennebunkport homes are valued at more than $500,000, more than $500,000, and over 90% are valued at more than the housing market area median, which is around $250,000. So it's a very expensive community. Next. So now we'll talk a little bit about other factors that influence demand for housing. So school district is important for families with children, something that they certainly look at when they're trying to decide where to locate. RSU 21 is the top school district in the HMA. It regularly ranks in the top 5 in Maine. So this makes Kennebunkport very attractive to families with school-age children. They want to send them to a good school district. Next. Property tax rate is another factor that obviously influences housing demand. Kennebunkport has the lowest tax rate compared to all the other communities in the HMA. This is based on the full value tax rate, so this is an apples to apples comparison of tax rates that's adjusted based on differences in assessment schedules. So 7.46 per $1,000 of full value of a home. So on this side here, this tells you what the tax bill would be for the median value home in each community. There at Kennebunkport's toward the middle, a little bit on the lower side, about $3,500 for the median value home. So taxes are still very competitive, even though homes are quite high in value. Next. So now getting into actually projecting future housing demand. So this is the kind of thing that a housing developer would do to understand what the market's like. They want to know, what are the population trends, what types of housing, what types of demographics are likely to locate here, what kind of housing should I build, how much of it. So as we said before, population growth is expected to continue, but slow slightly. This graph is showing the annual population growth rate. The top orange is past, blue is projected. So just a slight decrease, but still continuing to grow in Kennebunkport. The rate of growth is a little bit higher than the housing market area in the county, quite a bit higher than Maine, and about even with the U.S. growth rate. So strong housing demand is expected to continue in the region. About 1,750 new year-round households are expected to locate in the housing market area in the next 5 years. So that would increase the number of households by that amount, 1,750. It's very much driven by seniors. So that's a result of both people kind of aging into that cohort and also a lot of seniors moving here permanently to retire. Smaller increases in the 25 to 44 cohort and declines in the 45 to 64 cohort, which is again driven by people, baby boomer generation aging out of that cohort and into the 65 plus category.
So Tom, can we just, I mean, certainly we have a history of seniors, and so is that information about projections into the future driven mostly by historical and demographics, or what?
Yeah, so all of these demographic forecasts are based on historic trends. They could change, but this is just kind of the demographic momentum that's in place. This is what will happen if nothing changes drastically. Yeah?
Yeah, so that was just 2016 tax information, why we didn't use a more current number.
That's the most recent information that's available in the apples to apples format. Okay, next slide, please, Werner. So now when we talk about housing affordability, certainly the price of the homes available impacts the demand and who can afford them and what kind of demographics that would be. So you have a highly desirable community that equals high housing demand, and that by necessity means high home prices. So we know you have high home prices here. Market rate housing is generally priced in Kennebunkport above $400,000. It's hard to find anything below that price. And generally, a home priced at $400,000 is only affordable to a family making at least $100,000 a year. This graph kind of breaks it down in terms of what the maximum home price is for each income range. So for someone making between $50,000 and $75,000 a year, they generally wouldn't be able to afford a home that's priced higher than $270,000, and then kind of grows up incrementally from there. $75,000 to $100,000 annual salary would get you a home up to $360,000. So really, anyone below $100,000 in this kind of $50,000 to $100,000 household range would not be able to afford most market rate housing here in town. Where am I? So affordable workforce housing would need to be priced between $175,000 and $360,000 for someone, a household in the $50,000 to $100,000 bracket. I know that's a lot of numbers, but hopefully that makes some sense. There is strong demand for both market rate housing, $400,000 above, and affordable housing below $400,000 here in town. So the housing demand opportunity. So Kennebunkport can, and I'm not saying I recommend this or that it has to, but it can capture between 200 and 400 year-round units over the next 5 years townwide. There is demand there for that. About 55% of that demand would be for the market rate category in town, so priced above 400,000, 45% priced between 175 and 360,000. 2/3 of total demand will come from 55 and up age groups. And I just want to be clear, this is a pretty conservative estimate. First, we're only looking at year-round households, so this does not look at all at seasonal demand. It only considers new households, so net population growth. It does not consider the fact that people that might already live somewhere within the region would choose to locate to Kennebunkport if the type of house at the right price they wanted was available. And then the range is just based on different population projections from different sources. So conservatively, we can say between 200 and 400,000. The affordable demand especially is likely understated because if there were homes priced between 175,000 and 360,000 in town, people would certainly line up to buy them. So overall, yeah. Okay, so that's housing. Now I'll move quickly on to retail and services opportunity. So you have the village parcel. Most of the developable land is kind of interior, so it's not along major thoroughfares where retailers would typically like to be. So there is some opportunity for a small neighborhood retail, which would likely be food oriented, either a neighborhood restaurant, a coffee shop, or a food market. It would almost certainly need to be located along North Street. It's a little bit of a challenging retail location due to the distance from Dock Square. I know it's not that far, but it's not in the cluster where everything else is, and certainly from Route 1. So it's really going to be a more local serving type of retail. So if you did have some sort of restaurant or coffee shop or food market, it would not be supportable alone by new village parcel residents. There just wouldn't be enough residents there to support that. So it would really need to serve the whole community. Something that would help sustain such a use would be office uses nearby. For example, if there were town offices that were built on the parcel, that would help with a sort of lunch crowd to sustain, a coffee shop or that sort of thing. So that's probably what would be most likely here. Visited-oriented shops at like the type you have in Dock Square probably wouldn't be successful because it's just a little bit too far away from the critical mass of retail activity. So I think, is that it? Oh, I have some, okay, so last slide, please, Werner. Yeah, sorry. Next slide, I meant. What does this mean for the village parcel? So there is enough residential demand to build up to 400 units in Kennebunkport over the next 5 years. The town may choose to build some, all, or none of these units on the village parcel. And retail uses on the village parcel might be challenging to support, but there is some opportunity for small-scale food-oriented on North Street. So this is what could be supported in the market. It's not what I'm recommending, just to be clear on that. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you think the impact is on the Airbnb on the housing market in Kennebunkport?
Yeah, so that's something we looked at. Camoin also did a housing assessment for Kennebunkport. I think we completed it maybe last year or the year before. Short-term rentals, Airbnb, those sorts of things certainly have a large impact on the housing market, converting year-round, especially on a rental market, converting year-round rental units to seasonal units. Someone that owns an Airbnb unit, for example, can make a lot more in a shorter period of time renting it seasonally than they can renting to a year-round person. So that takes a lot of year-round units out of the housing stock, and it drives up prices for renters and in general as well.
That's what's been happening in
Yep.
the last couple of years.
What is the current supply of housing, affordable housing in the HMA?
So I mean, outside of Kennebunkport, there is, and when we say affordable, we're talking here specifically about affordable to people in the $50,000 to $100,000 category. The median home in the HMA is, I think, about $270,000, which is right in that range. So when you're looking at the region as a whole, there is a fair amount of affordable housing, not a ton of rental options specifically, but it's more or less in line with what people can afford.
Numbers?
I don't have them with me right now, but they'll be in the report.
sessions, there's been showing of parking along the road. You didn't talk about traffic flow or parking in your presentation today. Is parking still being considered? To me, in the winter, snowplows and cars don't mingle very well.
Maybe Bob can answer that.
That was in the visioning session, and that was just to put a lot of ideas out on the table for discussion. As we've worked through this thing and fine-tuned it, that really was looking at it more towards the North Street end, where some potential other uses other than residential development, although there were some geared towards small, single, one-bedroom type units, if you will. And as we've looked at that a little closer, you know, there were some other challenges on that corner that just, besides parking, that really weren't going to work in terms of accommodating the type of density. So that parking along North Street, I think, was thrown out in terms of some of the comments we heard of being able to slow traffic down. Typically, when you make the lanes narrower, people tend to slow down. Parking does part of that. So that's why part of that scenario was thrown out on there. And I know that people usually just by the crest in the road, they're traveling pretty quickly until they get to the curve in the road. So, but again, that was something that had just been thrown out as a potential traffic calming thought. It wasn't anything that's actually put into the plan, but it was more to get some discussion going. Okay.
From the last time, did you do a traffic flow analysis?
No.
You haven't yet.
No. And that's actually not part of this. We have a traffic flow analysis that's records that the town has that was done for the old Port Village that we can make some assumptions out of. But there's no, but part of this process is not to do a full-blown traffic assessment.
Because you do realize 134 to 180 units, people have at least one car, if not more. And if you're here during the season, you know North Street is awful getting into Times Square, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, we'll be addressing some of that in just a summary, but again, a full traffic study is not being done for this. Okay. Again, I'm going to hit one slide that's going to talk about what the purpose of the master plan is. But essentially, the master plan is to provide guidance. What you've seen as we've developed through this whole thing is not what the town's going to build. It is showing what could happen to the property. So that's all.
So,
Laura?
Bob, can we just focus on questions for Tom?
Sure.
Just so
Yep.
we don't hold Tom up.
First green shirt, yeah.
Yeah, in your experience, have you seen any discord when you have mixed use, which includes some fairly expensive homes and affordable housing in the same area? Have you experienced that?
So not at the price points we're talking about. I mean, you know, someone making 50,000 to 100,000 is, you know, it's someone that is a worker in your community. You know, usually there aren't any issues at that price point at all.
But I'm saying in the same development,
Yeah.
you've got a high, say in this development, you have so many so many high-end and so
Mhm.
many affordable. Is there any discord between the neighbors, so to speak? Have you experienced?
I have not experienced that, and those sorts of mixed income developments are becoming more and more common as people kind of are interested in kind of the social fabric that evolves when you have, you know, more of a mix of different people living together. So no, I have not seen that, and those seem to be, you know, growing in popularity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you been in discussions with builders or contractors or whatever the proper term is about how this will be constructed, who's going to do it, and so on in detail so that we can move forward with what you're showing?
No, so we are not at that point in the process. I'm not sure if that is even necessarily part of this process. This is just kind of to provide a vision of what could be developed
Grow
here.
on its own.
Correct. Right.
So just to be clear, Tom's job is to give us market data information. So the committee was asking questions and the public was asking questions about what will the market support and how do we know what the demand is. And so Tom's job as part of the consultant team is to give us an understanding of what the market is. But there has been no decision yet about whether anything will be built.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you to clarify, the 400 units that you thought there was demand for,
Mhm.
that's year-round demand as opposed to what so much demand has been in this town, which is seasonal?
Correct. Yeah, year-round demand. If the housing could be provided at the price points discussed, there would be demand for that many units of year-round housing.
And that was for the whole community, not just the village parcel?
Correct.
Good.
Yep.
How would you keep it for year-round housing? I mean, how do you prevent 400 families from someplace coming in and buying seasonal, low price seasonal homes that they will rent out as a Airbnb? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so
Tom,
yeah.
can you just, somebody reminded me we should probably repeat the questions, because people at home can't hear them.
Sure. So the question was, how could we guarantee that the housing was actually for year-round people and not, bought as seasonal units and so forth? So some communities have put into place restrictions around Airbnb that would limit the ability to use it as an Airbnb. For using it just strictly by the owner themselves as a seasonal home, there isn't a lot that can be done. What you can do is for affordable units specifically, you can have income restricted covenants on the property. So if you have to make a maximum, in this case, $100,000 a year to be in the home, that could limit it to some extent. There's different things you can do, but there's no way to 100% guarantee it's only going to be year-round people.
How do we keep it from becoming shady parcel? Destination living.
Right.
And they're restricted to owner occupants.
You can do that. Yeah. I mean, this would all have to be kind of a town process too. Sorry, the question was, can you restrict it to owner occupied?
I thought your report, maybe this is part of it, was going to include all of the market data, which is excellent. But what costs actually were, and what it would cost to build a 1,500 square foot house, and what are the additional utility costs? Utility costs mentioned just get it through, but what would it cost to develop a pod of $175,000, $250,000 houses? How would that be supported and financed? What would it mean for land? Is the town getting any money back? Is the town getting zero back?
Yeah, so that's the next phase of this. We will be looking into financial feasibility to make sure that the plan that is devised could actually work from a financing perspective. And then, it kind of depends on what the objective is in terms of what the town gets back, either in, annual fiscal revenues or land proceeds and those sorts of things. So that's coming. Yeah.
My wife's a realtor. To what degree have you gotten the real estate industry involved in what you're planning?
Not yet.
Well, it would seem to me with some of the figures you're showing that they better get in there soon so you have them on your side.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what the plan is for engagement at that point, but point taken. Any other questions? Sure.
What would the tax bill on one of these affordable houses be? And how many students, school-age students, would be in these affordable houses? Would the tax bill cover the cost of the school students that would now be moving into town? Or would those taxes be going up because the household has more students than what the income is being produced from that tax bill?
So I can answer that generally. This isn't a surprise to anyone. Kids in the schools cost money. It's usually the biggest part of any town's budget. But you also have to weigh that against the fact that your community is aging rapidly and you almost don't have an elementary school left because of the shrinking enrollment. So it's a decision by the community to, understand that, yeah, maybe, the fiscal impact of a family occupied home isn't always positive, but the other benefits that can generate for the vibrancy of the community, the future of the community is also an important thing to weigh.
Tom, just one thing to note about our RSU 21 is that it's true that in a lot of communities in the state of Maine, how the impact of a school bill is calculated is usually based on valuation and population. A lot of places it will be a 50-50 mix between the two. So as your student population rises, your school bill will rise as well. In our case, our RSU 21 formula is built on valuation. And so whether we have one student or 100 students, it doesn't impact our bill. It is very valuation focused. And so that is one of the challenges we've had. We aren't necessarily saving money. So we have about 16% of the student population, but we pay about 42% of the bill.
Question, is there any move to modify that formula?
We don't have the votes to change the formula. I mean, it has to be negotiated between the three towns. And they're weighted based on population, the votes, so.
Any other questions on the market analysis? All right, I'll turn it back to Bob.
Thanks, Tom. Have that one last slide, Werner. Basically, I put this slide together to kind of give an overview of what the village parcel master plan is. And this is based on the RFP that went out with what we as a consulting team were asked to look at. And basically is to understand the existing site conditions and adjacencies. That includes all of the environmental constraints, the impacts for the power line easement that goes through, soil conditions, in terms of understanding what the capability or carrying capacity may be for the site. The other is identifying existing natural resources and regulatory requirements. That is the wetlands, the vernal pools, the state mandated regulatory requirements as far as setbacks from the resources. That doesn't include anything as far as town zoning, because when we looked at this thing, it was a blank slate that zoning would be looked at independently at the end of part of this process. So basically, you go through those first categories and you're identifying suitable areas, developable land, and opportunities for development options. We were asked to look at how this property could be used to create a housing market. They were to provide the opportunities for the aging in place senior population to be able to downsize and find a place affordable to downsize to find the way to what would be the price point that Tom is working on for. As an example, it was pointed out a couple of meetings ago, your police chief lives in Sanford and can't afford to live here. So when you have your public servants and your folks that work for your public roadway, highway, what have you, that can't afford to live here, it was part of how do you be able to find a way to make properties a little more affordable, as well as for young families. So it was a full range in terms of what we were asked to look at in terms of a housing component. The objective was to obtain a broad range of public residents' input, stakeholder groups, municipal services departments, so we understand what the community needs are for infrastructure, as well as what the municipal government authority, and basically looking at what the municipal needs are. So that was one of the criteria. The other is review the current zoning, and ultimately out of that is to develop a concept plan that provides potential development opportunities within identified developable areas. Those, partly what you looked at earlier, was identifying where developable land is and how you could actually create development. Doesn't say exactly what the development is going to be. We've gone through the scenarios that acts as a model guideline so that when we get to the end of this process and the town goes to the next step to decide what they're actually going to do with it, they've got a menu of items that they can pick from and say, okay, we like that particular element, that's what we're going to pursue. You know, that's the whole objective of this plan, is to provide a role or a guide model for the town to make the next steps. It is not the plan that the town's going to execute in terms of building. It's really to show you what the potential is. Because right now you've got a piece of raw land out there, you have absolutely no idea what you can do with it. It had a subdivision approved on it that you knew what that was going to do. Now what we're trying to do is give you an idea of what that land can be turned into as a benefit to the town. And a lot of getting tongue-tied here, sorry. A lot of folks are seeing all those houses and are concerned with what that does to the taxes, the schools, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's a lot of impact that we were showing on those plans. But we needed a point to start from to be able to whittle our way back down to what is a reasonable and meets the objectives of the town to give them some sort of guidance. So you start up here with basically a wish list outside the box, you know, just to put the ideas out there so that you can then start to synthesize those down. So that after basically looking at what the potential development is, we'd be preparing recommendations for potential zoning amendments, either changing and creating a whole new zone, or look at contract zoning provisions to actually pre-approve what would happen out there, identifying this is X use here, this is X use here, that type of thing, and determining what those options are, or totally new zoning regulations. You know, within those, some of the questions were how do you restrict it to all year-round homes and not seasonal type use. That's something that can be looked at as you start developing zoning. Part of that comes down to the legal aspect of whether you can legally do it or not, but those are the things we'd be looking at in terms of looking at what potential zoning options you might be able to have. And then the end part where someone asked if we've looked at contractors. Well, we haven't, but part of the end process is to identify potential partners for a public-private partnership where the town and a private developer does something on this site, or whether or not the areas are identified as a housing pod and you solicit private developers that may want to do and may have a market that meets the demand the town is looking for in terms of a price point and housing style and for all year-round housing. So those are the criteria that, you know, in brief summary of what it is our charge to give back to the town. So I can tell you, I appreciate all the comments and all the public interest in this. Sometimes you don't see that, and sometimes in my professional career until it comes down to everybody voting and doesn't know exactly what's happened. So very appreciative that everybody shows up and provides us with comments. Yes, ma'am.
I understand that the master plan is guidance for potential opportunities, but I would hope that going forward, if there is a significant expenditure, that it is on the ballot, not at a special meeting with a handful of people. And this would be a handful of people, and this is a well-attended meeting. You know, if the selectmen and the town manager and the steering committee are confident that this is what the people in the town really want and the voters want, then it should be on the ballot to confirm that. So that would make me much more comfortable really with this whole thing.
Well, I'll speak from my understanding of what our charge is, and that is to get it to the point where the town can then make a decision which way they want to go. One of the first questions that was asked when we first started this thing, what's it going to cost us? Because everybody was looking at seeing the layout. You got roads, you got this. That's not part of what this is, that the steering committee at the end and then ultimately the selectmen and the town, however that gets proceeded, is this is what you're going to do and this is what you're going to build and this is X. It gets you to that point where then your next step is how do you want to actually develop it. Then is when you start looking at the dollars and cents. What is this going to cost? How do you make this manageable? You know, as an example, if I said, you know, you're going to do the first 1,300 feet of roadway coming in, to be able to develop that first pod. That may be something that comes out of the end of this, that then the next step the town looks at is how do you proceed with that? So what the recommendations out of this, again, are guidelines. It's not saying you're going to go ahead and do X, Y, and Z on this, okay?
So I was, go ahead.
I had a woman in the back, sorry.
I'm looking around and I think many of us have fall into that 65 plus age.
I hear you.
As I'm listening to all this, I'm thinking, a question I don't really hear is what kind of town do we want to leave for our children and grandchildren? And do we want our children and grandchildren who are maybe teachers, maybe plow the roads, maybe do whatever? Do we want it to be a community where they can live and grow up and bring their children? It's not going to really impact a lot of us for a lot of years.
Well, I think that's part of what our charge is, to figure out how to be able to create that market, not where the upper end of what Tom was talking about, but be able to find a way that the town can create an atmosphere that you can actually create that market range. And that's part of the charge that we had in developing the plan. Jamie?
Yeah, Bob, on the same note, if I'm not mistaken, the 50-some acres that the master plan identifies right now, it encompasses 100% of the overall ability to build out on the 85 acres, correct?
Right.
So that doesn't, even if we don't follow it in A to Z 1 to 10 format for the master plan, it says up there that the plan is to make use of all the developable land, not to leave anything for the next generation or the next third generation.
No, the intent was, again, was to figure out what you could build. And there are elements, as I've said, that you have no idea what you need. And part of this whole thing is to identify areas that are developable. You know, there were different size pockets. The two largest were 13, there were some 6. As this steering committee and the town start looking at this thing, you may decide that, you know, that first pocket on the right-hand side next to the McKay property is something that is large enough that the town wants to preserve and say, okay, we don't know what the future need is, but here's a large chunk of acreage that we can preserve for future use. So that's part of the next steps in this whole thing. I mean, as I said.
I understand that. I just look at it as, we've identified 100% developable land today.
Right.
Well, I think that's a good point
Sure.
to pause for a minute, Bob. And Werner, if you could go back to the map.
First slide.
Had, yeah, the beginning of that. So, I mean, that's one thing I was hoping to do with the steering committee today, was to get feedback on, what you want the plan to say. So, since our last meeting, we've done some they've done some cost analysis in terms of the roadway and the utility costs. I think we've taken a much more macro look at the parcel in terms of, what could be conservation. Certainly, we've heard a lot about conservation, as well as, where are the best developable pieces and how that might be broken up. We've seen through the visioning process a very dense development proposal, and of course, the more dense your development, the easier it is to pay for that infrastructure, certainly. But, I took a journey back to the beginning a year ago and to say, what was the purpose of all of this? And so the people who did come to the meeting and raise their hands, part of the steering committee's job is to represent the public, the public's vision and how we want to proceed. And at that time, there was a lot of feedback and comment about, well, what's the plan? We need a plan. And people were stopping by and emailing and talking to selectmen about what they thought that the village parcels should be and what they thought the future should be for that. And we said, the selectmen voted to do this master planning process to engage everyone so that everyone could be a part of what is the future plan. And so we have heard through this process everything under the sun, right? We have heard about swimming pools, and we've heard about community gardens and affordable housing and market housing, and maybe some, we've heard a lot about no commercial activity or no tourism. I mean, there were some concepts that I thought came out of all of this, regardless of whether we're talking about the village parcel or the community as a whole. We've heard a lot about people wanting to have a sense of community, about people wanting gathering places, places to connect, a place that feels like it's there for the residents versus the tourists. And how we connect that through the fabric of the town, I think, is important. I mean, it's not just about the village parcel. We've seen, designs through principal and the visioning session that were very mimicking of a village, residential area that could be very tense and that could pay for itself. But it doesn't mean that we have to create a plan that shows all this dense residential development. We've certainly recognized that year-round and affordable housing for workforce and year-round community members and our aging population. I mean, we've heard all of this, and these are all kind of facts swirling about us. But at the end of the day, I mean, the master plan should be a statement from the community, just like the comprehensive plan, about what we see the vision is. And I think it's important to just take a pause and rather get taken down the road by everything that we've heard to date, where you guys see we are in this process, or if there's other factual information that we could bring you. I think Jamie is on target. I think we have also heard a lot about the future and about what future needs are. And I haven't heard anybody say that there's a demand to do something right this moment, that we need X. I mean, yeah, we need a town hall, and we're starting that programming space study. It doesn't mean it has to go there, but we do need to address that. We probably need to do something about our village fire station, and we're looking at the programming needs for the future, as well as what renovation possibilities are possible here. So we don't have all that information. Before we would plop one of those on the village parcel, we ought to really look at those infrastructure costs and whether that even makes sense to do there, or whether it would make sense in alignment with other things. We've talked a little bit about coastal resiliency and sea level changes and how that might impact some of the more, the Dock Square areas and along the Kennebunk River, and whether the committee would like to hear something about that. But that's for the future. Those are all future things. Some are much farther down the road than others. And certainly I think the future does play a part of that. And do you guys see needs that are coming in the next 5 years? Or do you see that a lot of this is far away? And so our plan should be more about how do we make sure when that happens that those people that will make those decisions at that time are best prepared to do it in a strategic manner, so we don't waste land and waste money in that process. And so I just wanted to take a pause and see where the committee is at this point.
I think that one of the things we have to keep in mind is the fact that Tom says that there is need for maybe 400 units over the next 5 years. That may or may not have any impact on this piece of land. That's talking about the need in Kennebunkport, not the need for the village parcel. And I think people get those two things conflated, and it doesn't mean that we're gonna try to build 400 houses.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I wouldn't even use the word need. Kennebunkport doesn't need to build 400 units. It's just how many that could be supported if they were built.
I think we gotta sit back and take a look at what we're talking about as far as the overall plan goes, because one of the things I have said all along that I'd like to have mixed economic type houses, with some affordable housing along with high-end housing and so forth, that make it sort of a neighborhood. But in order to do that, we need to sit down and plan out, obviously, that the affordable houses probably would have smaller lots and so forth, and we're gonna sit down and say, you know, what fits within the codes, the current land use ordinances and so forth, and gotta come up with some kind of an early plan, because it's gonna require that there are code changes and so forth, and those are gonna probably take a year or so anyway. And we've always said all along, I think all of us have said, that we don't expect everything to happen now. We're looking for maybe 25 or 30 years out. It could be that long before we decide before there's a demand for the things that people need. I think there's probably a demand now, but we don't know exactly what that is, and we've got to plan that out. And I think that's where the planning for looking at the land use ordinance and so forth takes place. The infrastructure costs, we've talked about, we may need to do something up front so that we can get some of the money back. Because I've taken a look at it and I've said that, you know, if you had 100 houses at $400,000, I'm just throwing numbers out, you're not going to get taxes in a year that's going to pay for what you're spending there. So we've got to take a look at the whole thing, the whole economics and everything else that goes with it, along with what we really want there.
But what this master plan's done is given us some sort of a roadmap, what we can and cannot do with this property. I don't see that we're gonna do anything right tomorrow, the next day, or next year. I just think that we have a lot of, this is just the beginning. And we have a long ways to go before we can make any type of decisions at all. So I think Bob and his crew have done a wonderful job putting something together so we can look at this and say, well, this is what we can do, and now we know how much land we have to be able to work with, and how much land that we can't do anything with because of the wetlands and the whole 9 yards. Just because you're saying that you could build 150 or 170 units on this property doesn't mean it'll ever see that. And that means that would probably be the full boat. When we do, I'm pretty sure, we all think about saving some land for the future, quite a bit of the land. So I thank you very much for what you've done, what you guys have done with this, because you've given us a good, something to work with. We didn't have anything before, absolutely nothing. So, thank you.
And I would agree. I think back to early on, and, you know, when the town came forward and asked if we should purchase this property to help address future needs. For me, it's, what are our most pressing needs, and if appropriate, how can we address them within this parcel, whether it be on the 2.5 acres for a town hall / fire barn, if that's a true need or not. So I think, as a committee, I would suggest we need to know where our most pressing needs are, and if this parcel is appropriate to address those, then kind of talk through some of that. I'm here, the presentation tonight or this afternoon was fantastic. I'm hearing there's probably a more pressing need for senior housing at the moment than there might be for workforce housing. Who knows? I don't know. But, we'll continue to get more information, and to your point, Alan, this could live on for quite some time. I also think that as a committee, we should come up with some recommendations for pulse check, community pulse check, if and when this effort is over, and inevitably needs change that we couldn't think about or we didn't foresee coming. How do we engage and allow for there to be engagement with the town so that as things change, we, can revisit and say, well, what we thought about 5 years ago wasn't really that great of an idea, or heck, the parking lot, I'm not using a parking lot as an example to put a parking lot there, but how many times a year is the parking lot flooded now down behind Hurricane and Allison's? And to me, I get a little worried about what Dock Square is going to look like in 15, 20, years. And so anyhow, if this is something that will live for a long time, potentially, and during that time, inevitably, I think our needs are going to change. As a committee, we should think about what type of recommendation might we make on how the town, whether it's the Board of Selectmen or Lori and her team, or whomever's here when Lori retires, brings this back to the townspeople to get another pulse check and possibly redirect.
This was really helpful today too, for me, because this was one of the first, we've had a lot of other information, but your data and the market analysis, because I think we'd had some questions about that before. Well, how do we know, and what's the median house cost in other places? All of that, and we'll continue to get that as time goes on, as we gather more data and do more studies on whether we need a fire station or all of those needs assessments. All of that really factors into, again, we have this land that's the last buildable of this size in the town, and I think, as everybody said, we don't know what those needs are going to be, but if we had lost it, we wouldn't have that. So it's a great opportunity. We just, we're taking it slow, and I think we're on the right track. It's just there's more to do. This is just the first step, but it's we've got a lot of good input now, and a lot of a good help from the consultants on kind of what's there, what's buildable, what's not, what we might do, all the town visioning. And then, it's a kind of a take it year by year and kind of see what the immediate needs are and how we want to go from there.
I have been thinking about this from the point of view of cost. When I first started thinking about this site, even before I got involved in with the Village Parcel Committee, I was thinking, well, this is an opportunity for the town to perhaps look at what the highest and best use of the property is from a marketplace, which will be higher-end housing, obviously, I think, and try and influence that. The scale, the location on the property, the phasing, and so on, and through RFPs, request interest from developers who then might be asked to do trails, build some community facility on the site, and so on. But as this whole process has evolved, I think it's clear that open space and affordable housing, however you want to, whether that's workforce housing or senior housing, but it's different kind of housing at a price point that's different from what deviates from the sort of the market, and possibly a town facility on the site. None of those will really contribute much to infrastructure costs on recovery of any of the town's investment. So I think, as we look at this, we need to balance the amount of affordable housing, senior housing, workforce housing, how much trail development there might be. I still believe that some connection, a pedestrian connection between School and North Street would be terrific, and maybe that's all we need to do. But I do think if we're going to look at this from the point of view of costs and how much it's going to cost the town, at some point the town will need to issue an RFP to a developer of higher-end housing with some specific requirements in it, and not leave it entirely to the marketplace. But we still got a lot of work to do.
Jamie has had his piece here.
After you.
I was just gonna add that, I do know that, our infrastructure, water is pretty good, but our sewer system is, we need to watch where we're headed with that as far as the amount of building that takes place in the town. It's not unlimited in our ability to treat waste.
From what correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I heard in the past, that we still have enough sewer capacity for another couple thousand homes.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I don't think it was a couple thousand homes. I think we do have some more capacity, but it is limited.
Yeah, I'm just asking.
And the question is, where do we want to spend that capacity?
Exactly. I mean, and so do we target a specific part of town, and do we try and bring people become more aware with the water tables that run through the, underneath the ground of this small town? And in the sense of, I know we have really good codes regarding water treatment, for private homes, septic tanks, and leach fields and such. I also know that we're always tested, like that, what are you gonna, the taxpayer looks as this is an investment, and they're testing to find out, that, well, what's your return gonna be, and there's a lot of business savvy people that end up in this town one way or the other. So I think that's a question that we just need to come to grips with somehow. Not like in a simple sentence, but that it's an ongoing question. That this is not a free thing. Nothing's gonna happen here without additional, it's foolishness to think like that. But to protect our investment, as well as invest in the investment, and keep it going. I think those are important questions as well. Not just which home, how big a home, and where it gets put, but as an overall bigger picture of it. We put $10 million out as an investment for the future, but we also have, like Tim was saying, very specific needs that maybe that's the short-term goal, and maybe the road stays the way that is, but it doesn't get done all the way. It's a stub at some point further into the property. I don't know.
There's one thing about it. The town bought the land, and said, we're in control of destiny. The public's in control
Correct.
of destiny.
Absolutely,
That
yeah.
particular piece of property, which means an awful lot to this community.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah. There's a lot of other
town
communities
owns
that this is an eye-opener
This
to a
is-
lot of towns in the state of Maine.
Because we had very little property before this particular piece of property. that
Well, we
bought.
have some good holdings, but they're all over. They're scattered
and
small
and they're
pieces.
small.
Correct, and some are small.
Some of them are small. We're fortunate to be able to have this,
Yeah.
and we want to take care of it, so.
As we talk about types of housing, we tend to talk about affordable housing and housing for older Kennebunkport residents who want to downsize. Those are not necessarily the same thing, right?
Right.
Affordable housing, workforce housing is defined and easily defined. Having housing for people 65 and older who wish to downsize is not defined. I mean, that could be affordable housing, or it could be somebody who has the means to build an expensive, smaller house than they now live in. I want to make sure that we don't equate those two types of housing and find ourselves in a box.
Well, you might also see some high-end housing also.
Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, I would be all for some of that, absolutely. Not just workforce housing or senior living housing. I would like to see some higher-end housing in there also, a good mix of things.
I think you can also offer one incredible deal to somebody that you're hoping would live in this community, but they may be already established somewhere else, and regardless of the price point, they're not tearing up their family from the local school some other town and moving here just because we created a great house at an affordable price. That we would like to have, all of our town, workers, if you would, live close by, but they're not necessarily gonna tear up and
I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I'd like to stay in Kennebunkport, but I can't afford it. I can't afford to buy the house. I can't afford to spend $500,000. I can't pay for it, even though they have a great job, and their wife has a great job.
Yeah.
They just don't have that quite enough, and they end up moving a couple towns over or whatever, and they still would like to be here, but they can't.
Yeah.
So I would like to see some type of housing in the community. It doesn't have to be in the village parcel. It could be anywhere. I mean, we have a housing trust now that's working on some affordable housing in a smaller way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're moving in the right direction. I would, I like one of the ladies just left a while ago, but she mentioned all this. What about the future? What
Yeah.
about the future of our kids? We'd like to see them stay here if they wanted to.
Yep.
So we are closing in on needing to develop a plan. We've got a few minutes left before we have to move over for growth planning committee. So what do you need, Bob, for our next meeting? Or from the committee, what would you like to see in order to help refine this plan to what you envision?
We'll have to listen to everybody's comments from the steering committee as well as some of the public comment. think what I'd like to do is have every one of the steering committee members take that plan and put their notes on it as to what they see based on all the work we've done to this point, what everybody's heard from the community as to where and what you see on that plan. Future use, you know, the housing, where housing may go, where community gardens may go, if you will. But to really start putting some notes together, because that's gonna be better for us, rather than us developing something, coming back and back and forth and back and forth, and we're running out of time to finish this up. So I think that would be a good exercise, that you folks could put that together, get that to us, and then we can look at pulling together a composite, if you will, and do that as a next review. And then I know Tom's gonna still be doing some updated stuff as well, but, so we can pull that together.
So one thing, when I heard people talk about seniors and downsizing, and when we were through with Principal Architect, they did some, photos or presentations on these, I'm gonna call them cottages or smaller buildings closer together with a shared public space, and I've seen that played out in some other recent designs in other communities. And I'm wondering if we want to know what the market is for things like that. I mean, designers will tell you that this is new urbanism and, this is the way of the future. But I don't, if we are looking at seniors, whether it's market rate or affordable, what do seniors want, and what is the market telling us about that?
Well, what I can do for Tom is we can pull some of those images together, that everybody, the precedent images that basically people put their red dots and green dots on, and the ones that are kind of the ones that seem to be leading a direction, what everybody thought about.
What do you think, Tom? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, about those types of developments specifically, yeah, those are growing in popularity. I mean, there isn't a lot like that in the region, so it would offer something different, and I think it would do well in the market. I mean, seniors are mostly looking for, one level type housing that could take all kinds of different forms. The ability to have a community nearby, walkability, that appeals to seniors, certainly. So, yeah, the designs that Principal had shown, I mean, those would certainly be viable from a market perspective, yeah.
I mean, living in Maine and having winters, I mean, people are concerned about parking and having parking nearby, simple things like bringing my groceries.
Right. No, yeah, that's important too. Placement of parking. So with a lot of those designs, you'll have alleys, so that you still have in the front, it feels more like a neighborhood community space, walkability, but then it's served in the rear with easy parking and garages and those sorts of things. But yeah, of course, that's a concern, especially with seniors, limiting the need to walk in the cold and those sorts of things, yeah.
So how does the committee feel about Bob's suggestion that we would email you out the plan and that you would give us all feedback in time for the next meeting? You would want it prior to the next meeting, I'm assuming?
Definitely I'd want it prior to the next meeting.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're not gonna leave you guys out at all.
Lori, what is our next meeting date?
We haven't got that far yet.
Yeah,
We're working on it.
That, what?
Didn't we have some type on the calendar?
We did originally.
We wound up bumping the schedule around a little bit.
penciled something in on it, but I don't. The 10th and the 24th of October, were those two does that make sense?
Those were the last dates that we had in there.
Is that what that was, Mike?
Those are selectmen meeting dates, and so I think
all
we
right.
had them as potentials. So I don't know that we had another date after this one set.
Well, I've got the first week in October. I don't know if we set it though.
We didn't pick any date, we just said that.
No, it just says continuation.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna suggest that it won't be the first week in October, because I'll be gone for the next week. So in order to get stuff pulled together, I'd prefer if we do it
Yeah.
the second week in October.
How does October 8th work for people?
Tuesday, the 8th?
Yes.
Good. Good here.
Ross, how
Tuesday
about
the
you?
8th?
Uh-huh.
But I can get all of my thoughts.
So let's put down Tuesday, October 8th.
At 4 o'clock?
4 to 6?
4 to 6.
Yeah, my guess is it'll be growth planning committee that night, so.
Is that okay with everybody?
It's okay with me.
So Connie, we were just talking about that's all right, a date of,
have to play, by the way.
I hope you don't.
It's a fall allergy, but I sound, like I have consumption. Sorry.
We were looking at, Tuesday, October 8th.
That's good.
Does that work for you?
Yeah. Better than the 10th, actually.
Okay.
So,
Target that more like a workshop a little bit more than a presentation
Oh,
from
yeah,
Bob,
yeah,
right? Okay.
That way we can sit around a table and then take those and we'll bring a full-size scale of that and we can start, compiling everything. I'll bring some trace and we can work through,
Maybe get this
multiple
thing fixed.
scenarios.
maybe that will be working by then.
I hope so.
Public comment. Anybody have any?
Alan, thank you very much. My name is Charlie Sullivan, and first I want to comment, I think the committee has done a very nice job in the short time that they've been meeting and so forth, and 2 presentations tonight were very good. Question to the town manager of the Board of Selectmen, what has the committee been charged with? When do you anticipate a final report to the Board of Selectmen?
So when we their charge is to help develop the master plan and to engage the public in that process, which is what they've been working on. Originally, when we began, we set a date of October 24th to do a presentation to the Board of Selectmen. So we'll see where they sit on Tuesday, October 8th, and see if they feel like they're getting close enough to do that, or that might prolong into November.
Well, from my own standpoint tonight, I think we're a long way from a final presentation to the board or to the town. Bob, is it Bob? I noted that there were going to be some zoning changes anticipated.
I'm going to sneak over your shoulder.
Sure, go for it.
And basically, can I turn it up? Yeah, basically, what will come out of this thing is we'll be looking at making some suggestions in terms of potential zoning changes and options of how to be able to develop the property. It could be modifying the current zoning for the site, it could be a contract zone option, or it could be actually creating a zone unto itself. And basically, the framework for the zoning is what would be developed to then for the town to go ahead and actually develop the actual zoning standards for that.
Thank you, Bob. Alan, please correct me if I'm wrong here. Zoning changes to the town zoning ordinance, any zoning changes have to go before an annual town meeting,
That's correct.
okay? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. The infrastructure increase of 5.4 million on the initial package, and I know it came up very briefly. What was the impact going to be on the current treatment plant? Was that anticipated in the 5.4 million or no?
No, that's just the infrastructure cost for installing the utilities in the road network.
So that would come into play when the final presentation,
We wouldn't be looking at what the impact is on your sewer treatment at all. It's just basically looking at the infrastructure requirements for that property. And at that, right now, the numbers we're generating are strictly from North Street to School Street, because we're not showing a full development build-out of this property. The
So
scenarios
Bob,
we've
I need you
Oh,
to use a mic.
sorry.
You're going
Okay.
on way too long. So
Thank
listen,
you.
come over here and use. I'm just saying, no one
Okay,
can
somebody
hear
else
you.
can pass the microphone.
No one can hear you at home.
anybody else want the mic?
Yeah, somebody made a comment, the town manager, that the town is a public entity and everything is done in the open, has to be done in the open. Well, myself and many people in this room don't feel that's happened, because we can't understand how this purchase could be made without notifying the 2,788 voting residents by mail with a postcard like we got for the Visioning Center. Now, I realize this costs a couple $100 to send these out, but if the people had been notified by mail, this would have never happened. There's a special town meeting had 172 people in attendance, and I've been told that about 60% of them voted to buy this land. So out of 2,788 residents, only about 100 people voted this in, which is about 3.5 or 4% of the registered voters voted to spend $14 million, not 10. It's going to be 14 with the interest. So forget about the 10. But I just can't understand it. You know, it wasn't. If the people had been notified, this wouldn't happen. Now, if this was a pristine piece of land, maybe, but 10 million is way too much. But half of the land is wetland. It's non-usable. And I've walked this land, and it's a piece of crap land as far as I can say. It's the ugliest piece of land I've ever seen. Okay, great, granted, it's in the middle of town. But, you know, if things had been done right and been done in the open, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. We'd be home in front of the TV with a cocktail. That's all I gotta say.
I'm gonna be there. Thank you.
Chuck Azulis, I'm from Goose Rocks Road. I have exactly the same sentiments as this gentleman. I couldn't believe that the town could go out, that this small group of citizens could spend this amount of money that impacts especially the senior community. Now, we're the baby boom generation. We have 20 years to go. Some of us may be working now, part-time jobs, but we are very quickly moving into a fixed income situation. And you're asking us to put up 14 million. Now, the impact of this is that next time the town comes back and asks for money for something, we may have to just say no. Now, what I'd like you to do is go out and do a survey. You need to talk to the seniors and find out how many people want to downsize and want to downsize here. And that would give you the data you need to know if there should be some kind of development in the short term. But to sit back and have to spend $14 million and have nothing happening to this property, and I agree with this gentleman. I've walked that property many times. They went in there and they logged it. They pulled the stumps. There's a huge hill in there, I think, of stumps and loam. There is acres of land where the loam has been stripped. Nothing is going to grow on there. You have a 60 to 80 foot road going in there, double-sized road that's been put in, and it is a construction zone. And it's going to stay like that for the next 20 years. Nothing is going to grow there. One other comment is, people talk about having affordable housing and worker housing. If I have to pay $14 million for that land, I want that land to go to my kids, meaning the children of these seniors here, kids who have graduated from Kennebunkport High School. Our kids cannot afford to live in Kennebunkport. Now, if you really want to save something, have something in the future, have land that these kids can buy and grow families up. Thank you.
Hi, Paul Hogan. Lori, could we send to your email address or somebody's email address comments on the plan like you've invited from the committee? So that would be, who would we send it to?
Sure, you can send it to me at my email you can find on the town website.
Thank you.
Yep, and I can forward them to the Village Parcel Committee.
Okay, and on the sewer, well, it may not be in Bob's purview, it wasn't in the RFP. It would seem to me that, you know, it would be foolish to adopt a master plan and then surprise us with, oh, it's $3.5 million to upgrade the sewer plant. And I know it's not in the master plan. So how that would impact the committee, I don't know. But certainly that information should be available to the committee and to the public.
Yeah, and we've had some recent engineering analysis done on our compact, so I agree that that's valuable information we should have as well.
And certainly, before rushing to judgment, the other information from Camoin is really essential. So you know what could possibly be, you adopt a master plan and then you find out it was, it was just impossible, it was impractical for dollars and cents reasons. And the committee should know that the subsidy per per lot, per home is $100,000, $400,000. I don't know what it is, but. Anyone else?
I'm Susan Boak. I live in 26 Fox Run in Kennebunkport. I'm this year's chairman of the Senior Advisory Committee. We did do a survey, and we asked very simple questions, and 90% of the people who are living here, seniors, 65 and older, want to remain in their homes for as long as they possibly can. The same 90% want to drive as long as they can, and that's how they're going to get around. This may or may not be practical because we really don't have any control over health issues that might come on later on. In terms of housing, I just am so, appreciate so much the architecture that we currently have in this area of Maine, the interconnected farmhouse. It's called, some people call it big house, little house, back house, barn. And I could just see something like that where the big house, not really that big, and the barn, maybe an English barn of 20 by 30 feet, which is quite beautiful in proportion, and the interconnections that could be family, senior, family. The seniors that I've talked to much prefer a mixed-age development as opposed to being segregated off in a group of cottages. I mean, you can sell those to people coming in from out of state, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one comment here. Actually, it's a question, because this caught many of us unaware. Did every single selectman, and I was told by one selectman it was on advisory of the town manager, vote to have a special town meeting on this? Was that unanimous?
I believe it was, wasn't it? Wasn't all five of us involved in that?
I thought you all voted
Yes,
unanimously.
we did.
And I was told by one of them that was on the recommendation of the town manager. Is that true?
So the town manager doesn't recommend town meetings.
So-
The town
no.
manager tells the selectmen if they want to have a town meeting to address an issue, that this opportunity exists or not, or is directed by the selectmen to arrange for a town meeting.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
guess that
Town
was a little
meetings are-
misleading on his part then.
Town meetings are a great way of getting informed. You can ask the questions right then and there. I mean, we pass a $10, $11 million budget.
It's
at
not that,
town
this
meeting.
is special town meeting, I'm asking. Did you all vote to let
Yes.
100 people put us in
We-
$14 million of debt?
We figured at the time that there was almost 2/3 of the majority voted for this, not 60%. but
Well,
2/3 of the people.
172 people, even 2/3 of that isn't very big. So you're splitting hairs here when there's 2,800 people voted.
Well, I'm just explaining to you, you asked me the question, and I answered your question.
Right.
That all five selectmen did vote to have a special town meeting. We thought it was very important to do it. We did it, and if I had the chance, I would do it again if I had to. Because this particular piece of property is a once-in-a-lifetime for this community. It's so important to have land
I think
in
that's
your
your
own
opinion.
community. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Hi. Two questions. First one's an easy one to Bob. Is it Bob?
Yes.
You mentioned something about a contract zone. How could that exist? Isn't that, would there have to be a quid pro quo between the town and another,
Developer? the town could do it as a contract zone and define what it is they want to do and set the parameters that if a developer comes in and
Okay.
buys a portion, if that were the case, then they know exactly what their constraints are.
Okay.
But that's a little more complicated versus just doing a zone.
And my second comment deals with what's been articulated here in terms of notification of that special meeting. You can afford to put out a piece of literature to get us involved in the visioning, but you couldn't give it to all the townspeople like you should have. As I said, posting it on a couple of boards and putting it, I don't even know if you had it in the newspaper, maybe you did, but I didn't see it. I certainly would have come if I knew about it. So in the future, if you're gonna have a special town meeting, get it out by mail to the people as opposed to putting a couple of notices around town. And, again, we get hit with some high taxes. Locals who have homestead exemptions paid 7.8% increase this year. Non-residents probably pay close to 9.2%. And then we get stuck with no recycling and no plan. And so people that want to recycle are going to pay $500 to $250 a year. What you should have done there, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't be saying this, but I directed it to the chairman of the board. Why didn't you negotiate a contract with the Kennebunk transfer station and allow Kennebunkport residents to put their recycle in there for nothing? Because now we're getting whacked with 500 more and 250 more if you have a small bucket.
I think even Kennebunk charges its own residents for their.
I don't care what Kennebunk did. What you did is hit the locals with another tax. And you already went up 7.2 for the people that have homestead exemption, and then you went up 9 point something. And $14 million we're paying, when you could have probably paid $5 million when that, didn't you have a vote for $5 million a year and a half ago to buy this piece?
We did.
Yeah.
So
And the
what,
guy-
so just to be clear on the.
I haven't finished, ma'am. Sorry. And then what you could have done is, I guess the guy came up and they didn't foreclose on him. Now, what makes you think, if you let this go and didn't do the 10 million, that nobody was gonna, the bank wasn't owed 10 million bucks. The bank probably was owed 5 or 6, if that. They would have bought it and then they would have sold it for about what they paid for it. But we got hooked for 14 million as opposed to probably 5 or 6. Thank you.
So we have to end the meeting because there's another meeting right behind us. Is there any more questions from the steering committee?
I got one more question. Why didn't they buy it when they could have for $2.5 million? I never heard anybody say why they passed on that.
Nobody wanted it at the time.
Nobody wanted it.
Right, at that particular time. Some people wanted it, but it was never brought forward to the voters at all whatsoever. The selectmen at the time, from what I understand, probably was not interested in it, but that was well over 10 years ago. Times change. We had no land in this town until we bought this piece of property. except
Well, you've got a
small.
good swamp there now.
Well,
You know.
can I have a motion to go ahead?
When you
and-
figure,
Yes, I have a
Second.
motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
when
All
you
in
figure
favor?
it out, you paid $192,000 per acre of usable acreage. That's pretty expensive.